Can you beat Specter of Torment without using the Scythe? To celebrate the game's 2-year anniversary and finish off our Shovel Knight trilogy, we're taking this creepy ghost guy and stripping away his main weapon. So, as you can probably guess, the rules here are fairly straightforward. At no point during the game can we ever slash or dash using our Scythe. Really, if it's being put to use, it's just not going to work here. And with the challenge conditions in place, we can get our save ready to go. Now, common fare for these challenges is that we can use either a New Game Plus file with everything unlocked, or use a code and end up in the same spot. However, there's something in this case that really doesn't make the two runs apples to apples. You see, in New Game Plus, the darkness and will are fused, so the curios that we need to get through also diminish our life bar. But on top of that, that whole gauge is constantly depleting, making it very rare that we ever have enough darkness to actually get the job done. So, for the time being, we've got to put that run aside until some further testing. But with that, we can watch the opening cutscene and start up the challenge. Hey there folks, I'm Skip the Tutorial, and here we get to the bottom of gaming's weirdest challenges. And hey, if this is your first time here, then make sure to spare some darkness on that subscribe for weekly deep dives into your biggest questions. To start us off, the Plains intro stage is not all that taxing. Luckily, we can break through blocks with just our boots, and effectively save ourselves from some darkness by not having to use a curio. And frankly, we'll need to stash them away, especially for cases like this, where we can't dash attack to get the necessary height. In this case, the hover plume is a must-have, as we can float up past these lanterns and be on our way. And one last thing this stage can actually show us about darkness management is just how important checkpoints are. Seriously, get used to the pattern of picking up one of these respawns and then offing Specter Knight immediately after, because we'll be needing all of the darkness refills that we can get. And with some pretty thought out platforming through the earlier parts, we're finally ready to face Black Knight. And this fight can be a bit tough if you're not exactly familiar with his movement patterns. But luckily, we can use the throwing sickle to chain 2 hits at a time on the guy and take him down. So long as we don't get too overzealous in our shots, we can score back some darkness during the fight and then level him and his pet to the floor. And for the next stage, we have our pick. Personally, I chose King Knight's level for nostalgic reasons. But as soon as I started playing, I immediately regretted the decision. The main frustration here all comes back to darkness management. On several occasions during the stage, we'll just have plenty of boards on end without a checkpoint, but plenty of hover usage. For that note, killing enemies doesn't do great at recharging us, since we need to use darkness in some way to get it in the first place. All that comes together to mean we really need to plot out each move we take, especially in a screen like the infamous book room, where time limits and lava buckets are trying their best to make us act stupidly. But with some patience and practice, we can find our way through and right to King Knight's chambers. King Knight himself is no cakewalk either, since he'll be hopping and floating around the room as the floor falls out. It can be tough to land the hits necessary with just the boomerang. In that case, I think the spider curio is the best bet, as the big ol' hitbox is sure to smack him a couple times. And when we stack a chunk of those hits, his crown flies off and his cards get ready to head out for April. Next on our list, we head off to Plague Knight stage, and this one's pretty breezy in comparison. Because of checkpoints and level layout, we're generally in a good spot for just hovering past any issues. As long as we stay conscious about it, those sections really shouldn't run dry the darkness. For me though, the midway boss really sapped away the bar. I had plenty of deaths trying to figure out when to throw a sickle, because one thing to note is that if we miss a curio during his invincibility phase, it's a tough spot to come back, and likely leads to a restart. But if we maximize our efforts to when he goes beast mode, we can scrape by with just enough darkness, and use the following checkpoints to head over to Plague Knight. Like King Knight, a lot of the new stuff going on in this fight can cause some frustration. Like when he goes boy band and starts hanging out with 2 copies of himself. So as far as main strategy, I recommend waiting for all of the knights to pack into a corner, and then using the spider power to fling them down. After that set of stages, we actually have our first memory to play through. Now, for anyone unfamiliar with the story here, I won't go too much into it. All we need to know is this. While we do need to use the dash attack to get through this section, Specter Knight doesn't have his Scythe yet, nor does his animation really use the blade in this move. Is it a technicality? I guess so. But hey, we can't hold him accountable for what he did in the past. And if it works in the challenge rules, it works for me. Fading back to color, it's time for us to face off against Propeller Knight. And out of the gate, this one brings a lot of challenge. It's the resource management of King Knight stage, but now with all of the pain of wind gusts on top of it. The key lesson here really comes down to being able to switch between the Judgment Rush and the Hover abilities. And while Hover is our primary go-to, it does take up a lot of darkness. So in some parts, we need to balance it out by using this jewel to lunge us towards enemies. And while the rush doesn't do too well in crowded or lonely areas, it can do the job just right in some times, and gives us the full opportunity to fly with the captain himself. Now at first, I had no idea how to deal with his patterns. After only a bit of land fighting, we're all of a sudden tumbling through the air on these auto-scrolling platforms, and it gets real tough to line up the shot. I tried sickles, spiders, and talons, but nothing seemed to quite work. But then, I called up the help of this guy, the Skeletal Sentry, and everything turned around. Now, don't get me wrong, positioning the guy can still be plenty tough if we're not careful, but if we line up right and face him toward the enemy, his scattered shots can do loads of damage and gives us all we need to beat the boss and head back to the tower. However, when we get back to our place, we have a bit of an unexpected guest. That means we've got to fight Rees on home turf, and this fight cranks it up a bit. With loads of projectiles and a fast-paced movement to boot, there's a lot to keep track of in this one. To make it through alive, we can fall back on old classics, and just use the boomerang sickle when he falls to the floor to then get a couple shots. After that, we delegate him to Doorman and head off towards Polar Stage. And on this level, we face quite the dilemma. You see, the intended route is we ride our Scythe along these color-coded rails and have a great time. But that shouldn't be too much of an issue, right? We've skipped plenty of stuff for the Scythe already. Why is this different? Well, in this case, so much of the stage is built around these rails that it's difficult to pace out darkness and abilities to even slide by. But even with that, I still don't think that the run is over. Check out this armor set that we can wear, the Donovan armor, which is unlocked by getting all of the red skulls. With that, we take on the old appearance, and also we switch our Scythe for the previous blade. And while functionally they're very similar, it's undeniable that here he rides the blade instead of the Scythe, and we still don't have to use it. But aside from reasoning that, the rest of the level is pretty easy. Some of these switches can be annoying to hit under time restrictions, and things like the boomerang might just hit it twice when you only need one tap. But that's about all that we have to deal with, and Polar Knight's no real struggle either. Just be careful to position yourself properly and not fall on the spikes, and our skeleton buddy will take him out. With a heavy use of bouncy slime in these exploding blockchains, Mole Knight's stage got on my nerves, and I died more than my fair share. I think this part in particular with the two lava walls really shows the pattern of this stage. If you run out of darkness, then there's no way out. But if you have enough, then it's just a simple hover float over the gap. There's no real in-between for difficulty there, but good enough that the Jelly Beetle section goes by smoothly. And we can take down the mole with some help from this stack of bones. After that, we've got one more playable flashback, where we square off against Shield Knight. And for this one, I'll repeat what I said earlier. It's clearly not a Scythe, nor is a Scythe in the picture yet. And we can make it through this time with some legal dashes and slashes. Past that memory, we've got the chance to go find our soon-to-be home in the Lich Yard. And one thing to say about this stage is that the main challenge, in my opinion, has to be this section right after the second checkpoint. It's lengthy, takes up plenty of darkness if you're not careful, and can take a while to run back through if you happen to fail. But past that, and the crazy amount of hovers that we need in this darkness section, we go toe-to-toe with the Phantom Striker. And yet again, the Skeletal Archer comes in and is a lifesaver. And so long as we keep him out of the way of projectile storms, he'll bust us out, no problem. I can't say the same for Tinker Knight though, because the difficulty here is way backweighted. Really, this stage only brings about 3 problem points. For one, we've got this vertical auto-scroll section to make it through, which I previously thought impossible to do without slashing. But as it turns out, we've still got a way. Using the Risk armor here, we can break the checkpoint prior and have some regenerating darkness to make it through. And for that matter, it's a useful armor set whenever we struggle with darkness management, so keep that in mind for other sections like this. But after all that, we've got 2 phases of Tinker Knight to fight against. In his regular form, he's way more annoying to face off against than any of the other campaigns, since he'll happily crush us with his gear machine. But you know the drill, it's a couple of skeletal archers and a success for us. But we're not off the hook just yet, since we've still got his mech to fight, and thank goodness dying here just respawns this phase. To stand a chance, we'll need to stay on top of his lance and just fire off boomerang shots that need to chain hits. Falling off here can be a real death sentence, so we've got to try our best to stay on top if he's gonna go down. Last on our recruitment tour is Treasure Knight, and this is a stage that takes a lot of getting used to. There's just so much going on with new and unfamiliar level mechanics that figuring out the paths for darkness requires a lot of trial and error, especially if you're not well versed with the game already. And while the major pain points include the rocket platforms and this stupid unkillable fish, Treasure Knight is laughably easy. He gets hit by plenty of the sentry's bullets, and it doesn't take much time before we beat the stage. So after our set of tasks, we've got to go up and take the journey to the tower. And while I took my share of time and more on this rise and fall section, and got plenty frustrated with the fish again, the time that it took me to do all that was nothing compared to how much I spent on Black Knight, easily sucking up the largest amount of time in this run. I found this boss infuriatingly hard. Hell, it took me memorizing his whole pattern to a T to figure this one out. And even then, I still died far too many times. And with the sentry out of the run by his floating ability, I think we need to use the boomerang sickle when he lands to have any hope of beating this one. And sure enough, that gives us the win for this stage. To finish off, we've got one last stop left, because fortunately enough, we don't have to do the boss rush this time, which I'm very excited about, because I don't know how we could have spared enough darkness to make it through. And with that said, we can head off to the top floor of the tower, say hi to the Enchantress, and get ready to fight. With her shifting elevation and tendency to break the floor, this quickly rises up to one of the most annoying bosses in my book. We can use the boomerang ability to whittle her life down, but when she ducks beneath the map or floats just out of reach, we don't really have a darkness efficient method to take her out. Because of that, we just need to ride and hide during those sections, otherwise we're out of luck. But with a hearty sense of patience and plenty of good positioning on the destructible blocks, we can plant enough attacks to beat her phase. Although, to say that's where the challenge lightens up is idiotic, because we've still got one last foe to face, and he shows up extra huge and ready to battle. To get one thing clear, this is a fight about doing damage and doing it quick. Because of how the rails work here, we need to chain as many attacks on his weak point as we can possibly do when the stars align. Otherwise, he'll give us a layout that we can't easily make it through. It is a tough one, but we can use our Judgment Rush to get closer if we ever fall off the map. And partnering that with some boomerangs, we can shave his health down, and it'll look pretty good for us. That is, until we're faced with this part at the end, a long chain of lanterns that we need to make past. And granted, we could use some darkness to scrape through maybe one of these, but 2 in a row? I just don't think there's a way. And in that case, we do need to use the slash to get closer. But folks, we can do it with the blade. Now, we could talk about the differences in the animation, or just the fact that they're labeled as different weapons, but I think that's a conversation about semantics. In the end, we choose one of the curios to finish him off, and use that final hit to prove that Specter Knight's campaign is possible without using the Scythe, with a little asterisk right up there. It's up to you on the technicalities. But under that consideration, New Game Plus with the Donovan set becomes technically possible as well. And with that folks, slice this one in the top right to see Shovel Knight without the shovel, or Wall Run in the bottom right for another video. Rail ride that subscribe for weekly videos like this. But until then, take care, and you have a good one, alright?